You are now tuned in to the Storm Tracker podcast.
Welcome back, family, to the Storm Tracker podcast. I'm Marcus Benjamin, representing for CanesCounty.com, part of the Rivals.com network. Make sure you subscribe to CanesCounty.com for free. Use the promo code Miami30. And today I have joining me today John Garcia Jr., National Recruiting Analyst for Rivals.com, to discuss the Rivals camp coming up here in Miami this Sunday. Big camp on deck. Plus, we'll talk about the Miami targets and other players that Miami should consider for their 2024 class. Thanks for joining me today, John.
Always a pleasure, my guy.
Absolutely. So busy weekend for me coming up. Oh my goodness. Tomorrow is a huge day at Miami again. They continue to bring in big time recruits to the University of Miami. So excited for that, and also very excited for this Rivals camp. It seems like it's one of the biggest of the year. It usually is. And there's just a ton of guys that we've seen already during camp season, and then there's some that we haven't as well. So just kind of looking at the list, I know you know everybody and their mother is contacting you to to get their kid into this camp. So what names kind of stick out to you, and who are you excited to see on Sunday?
Yeah, Marcus, it's been a fun build-up, to say the least. Trying to get down to the number that we're allowed to have at the Rivals camp. But I think it speaks to not only the interest in kids competing, which, look, in South Florida, you always expect competitors, but just also the sheer volume of talent. Every cycle we talk about it, and this is, of course, multiple cycles here looking to compete, 25 and 26, mainly a couple of younger guys in there as well. But yeah, across the board, just a loaded camp that we're excited about. I think the usual positions come to mind: wide receivers loaded, defensive back absolutely loaded. But the surprise is that quarterback. This could be the best quarterback Rivals camp that the Miami area has ever seen. The 25 groups got solid competitors, and then some sleepers that are really good, like a Jordan Magwood from Carrollwood Day in Tampa, who's coming down, or Chris Denson from Plant City, who's maybe one of the most fascinating dual threats still on the board. But then the 26 group, I think this group we're going to talk about in this state for a long time, because Florida is not known for producing a volume of quarterbacks. And this 26 group's already got 5 guys who are 4 stars or better within it. And all but one are scheduled to compete this weekend. So we'll see Diabell, we'll see Noah Grubbs, we'll see Brady Hart, guys who are not only elite recruits, but guys who are getting closer to making that decision despite being so young in that class of 2026. So the QB group is usually one you can kind of skirt around down here, but definitely not on Sunday. I think this is going to be the headlining group. But of course, everywhere you've got a fascinating, risers and guys who are really turning heads. I look at the defensive line. You've got a Jarquez Carter who's going to compete here. He skipped a camp that we won't name in order to compete at the Rivals camp. So love to see him. And this is a huge riser in the northern part of the state. And then one close to home, Floyd Boucard, who really dominated the moment he moved to South Florida. Can he continue that against an offensive line group that is not so regional? I think what makes the Rivals camp unique is that there's only one camp in Florida, and it's Sunday in South Florida. So if you're from Tampa, Orlando, Jacksonville, Tallahassee, you got to kind of make that trek. And luckily for us, we've got a great group of offensive linemen coming down from IMG Academy and the northern parts of the state, like a Zaire Addison, who could be one of the fastest rising offensive tackles when all is said and done in this class. So to see a kid like that going up against South Florida talent, I think will be incredibly fun up front. Look, the running back groups are loaded, the athlete groups are loaded, and of course, receiver DB is you don't even have to talk about it. It is that deep of a group. Vernell Brown will be there to sort of back up the ranking we have on him. A variety of prospects will be looking to make moves. So really too many to name, but of course,
Yeah.
really excited to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. Every position I feel is definitely stacked here at this camp. Very excited to see the quarterbacks, like you mentioned. Want to see Noah Grubbs in person. I haven't had a chance to see him. You and I, we watched tape a lot, and but it doesn't um, do justice to so much of watching them in person. So excited to see him and other young guys too, like Zach Katz and um, of course, Brady Hart had a chance to kind of see him in person against St. Thomas and pads, of course, but see him against other guys, it's going to be fun to see as well. And of course, excited to see Diabell out there again, as well as EJ Yapor. So definitely a stacked group at quarterback, but receiver, I think, is always kind of the highlight, right? And you mentioned Vernell Brown being one of those guys. This is a big Miami target, and I'm fascinated with his game, but also his versatility. I mean, this is a guy who can play defensive back at a very high level. As far as his like rating and status, I think it's very similar to like a JoJo Trader of the last cycle, where he just has really sticky hands, can run great routes, and can lock up a defender on the other side. So just what say you on Vernell Brown, his recruitment, and Miami's chances here?
Yeah, Vernell has upped his stock in the last 6 to 12 months as much as any recruit really in the country. I think he went from a strong regional prospect, still a 4-star guy, to a true national, we got to do whatever we can to get this kid on campus type of prospect, to where it's not a Miami versus Florida battle like we might have thought a few months back. Now it's Ohio State in there. Alabama's trying to get him on campus. Texas wants him on campus. He's talking about going to the West Coast. So this has become a true national battle, and for good reason. At the floor level, explosive wide receiver who can work the slot or the outside fast enough and instinctive enough for you to just hand him the football, but polished enough to make moves at every level of the defense. But where he becomes more special is defense and special teams. Absolutely a dynamic returner, can also cover in the kicking game as well, which is something we don't talk about enough in this process. But I think defensively, yeah, this is a kid who could absolutely line up at corner or maybe slot corner and have a huge impact on a defense, not only with those great wide receiver and ball skills that you would probably expect, but the instincts and range he shows on Friday nights and certainly this offseason. It just makes you think, man, like, he's a great receiver, but could he be better potentially on defense? And that question is why we moved him to athlete in our last update. And we bumped him way up anyway. He's the number 3 athlete in the class for us at Rivals for that reason, because we do, like you said, like JoJo Trader, envision him as a potential defensive back at the next level. And what makes Brown maybe special and singular with that is that he's willing to play defensive back. He loves receiver. He loves the football. Everybody wants the ball. We understand that. But this is a kid who's open and willing to saying, hey, if I go to a school that maybe has a higher ceiling for me on defense, I'll lean into that and become a defender. So I think that's what makes him a no-brainer blue chip recruit, and for colleges, a no-brainer kid to go out and recruit, because worst case scenario, he's impacting your special teams right away. And as he develops, he can help that receiver group or the group trying to slow those guys down.
Absolutely. A great kid, too. All around a great prospect to add to anybody's class. But hopefully for the Hurricanes and the Hurricanes fans, he throws up the U or picks the U at the end of the process. So we'll see how it all shakes out. He's very open from what I know of his process right now. Of course, Florida may have a shot, being that he's a legacy there. But Miami definitely has a chance to impress him this weekend. As I understand, he will also be on campus on Saturday, among many others down in Coral Gables. But let's talk about this wide receiver group, John, because stacked as always. There's just going to be just a bunch of guys that will compete, like Javon Boggs. Um, we of course talked about Vernell Brown, Winston Watkins, who usually kills in this camp setting. If you ask me who's going to be the MVP at receiver, I would say there's probably a lot of money going on Winston Watkins. He's probably the favorite. It would probably be at maybe minus 150 or something like that.
The odds would be strong. Yeah.
Right, exactly. But Vernell Brown may push Watkins as well. But when you look at who will be named MVP, we'll start with receiver first. What are some of the candidates that you think will probably have a legitimate chance to win it?
Yeah, I think you have to start with Watkins, right? I mean, this is a kid who's already won awards at rivals camps in years past as an underclassman. And look, it's just his setting. He's a polished, explosive slot receiver who, like Vernell Brown, isn't the biggest guy out there, but his catch radius is like he's 6'1" or 6'2". You would be surprised at how lengthy and comfortable with the ball in the air these smaller receivers have become. You don't want to throw out crazy comps, but in terms of what I'm trying to illustrate, think of like an Antonio Brown, right? 5'10" type of player, but in the NFL, he's going down the field winning 50-50 balls against corners that are much bigger and longer than he is. So those are some of the standout traits for both Watkins and Vernell Brown. I think Brown's a little bit longer on the hoof, but you're going to have every type of wide receiver in this type of event. You'll have the slot types that are just nightmares to deal with, like we just talked about. Not just in 25, by the way. The 26 group will have some of those more dynamic players as well. I think Jason Lopez comes to mind out of the True Prep, at least right now, True Prep Academy. But you're going to have the big boundary receivers as well. You're going to have a Wade and Charles there. You're going to have a Jabari Brady, who's as big and physical, really, as it gets at the position. So it really, for MVP, and when we have that discussion as a staff, it will be fun. It's almost like, do you prefer a certain style? Do you want a guy who's going to go up and win that 50-50 ball as a big physical, flasher, or do you want the smaller, more polished guy who's just kind of leaving defenders, directionally challenged as they run routes? So this should be a really fun group to watch, really throughout. But of course, the DB group that's going to be on the other side is also strong. So how does that factor in to how these MVP awards line up? I mean, it really could come down to some luck, right? Like, do you get to go against a guy who's maybe not as long, not as polished as some of the better DBs that'll show up? But again, invite-only event. Just about every prospect there has a bevy of scholarship offers, if not high-level scholarship offers. So there's not a whole lot of isolation on a bad player that a prospect can take advantage of, which is part of the reason why we keep the numbers pretty low at these camps. But wide receiver will be as contested a position as any out there for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, watching highlights of Vernell Brown here, outstanding athlete. He will be matched up against some top level DBs like CJ Ewald. We got Tywan Cox as well, who's been kind of rising down here in South Florida. Fast receiver, fast defensive back. So when you look at defensive back, so who are some of the guys that could possibly win the most valuable player award?
Yeah, so this one I think is even broader because typically it goes to a corner, and we get that, right? Look, these are great receivers, and a corner who can lock someone down, I think is special and hard to do, especially in this setting. But I really like the safety group just as much. So for every great corner, and you mentioned a few, there's a Hilton Stubbs who's coming down from Jacksonville, the USC verbal commitment. There are players who can maybe present a different angle for that MVP conversation. So I think it's another loaded group. As you mentioned, some of the top names. Want to see Javari Flowers out there, a 2026 four-star guy who's another very steady riser. And then there's these lengthier safeties. Stubbs, Jaden Broadnax is a West Boca 2026 recruit who's going to be out there who's very fascinating and long. Like, can he lock down tight ends and go and contend with some of these receivers that are known for running great routes? I mean, it should be a fascinating group, but I think a broader group to cover from an MVP standpoint, and certainly that makes the race maybe a little bit more open for that DB group.
Absolutely. And that'll be interesting to see the one-on-ones. Those are kind of the highlights of these camps. So love to see those one-on-one battles. And of course, tune into rivals.com on YouTube for the one-on-one matchups that you'll see on video. Want to talk about running back a little bit because, Miami added Gerard Pringle to their class, a really fast, shifty running back. I think he was kind of under the radar, but I think Miami, his commitment to Miami kind of put a lot of people nationally on notice. This running back group here at this camp is pretty solid as well. You've got players like Tavion Swint, Javion Mallory. Those are two Florida guys that I definitely like. As far as running back is concerned, who should we be, looking out for on Sunday?
Yeah, another stacked group. The Miami Central contingent will be out there with several backs. Kaj Baker, who's maybe the fastest running back. Well, depending on if Pringle shows up, could be one of the faster running backs in the field, and that plays a big part. Obviously, this setting isn't ideal for running backs or linebackers, but we do get a sense of sort of their third down value. How quickly and swiftly do they move in space? And frankly, how comfortable are they with the football in the air? You mentioned Tavion Swint. I've seen him go out and win MVP at multiple camps because he is one of the faster backs who's very comfortable working down the field and catching the football. So I do think he'll be one of the leaders in the clubhouse. I think Baker could be fascinating. Pembroke Pines kid who was at Miami Central last year. Not many can keep up with him from a speed standpoint. So depending on the routes that he matches up with, I do think he could be sort of a maybe a sleeper pick to win some of these awards. And then it depends on some of these athletes. Where do they line up? We've got prospects coming to the camp who can legitimately play 2, 3, 4 positions. A Derek Cooper at Chaminade, an Alante Dean, who's a teammate of Pringle at Armwood, will be there. And these guys are running back, linebacker, safety hybrids on Friday nights. So they're going to get their pick as to what position they want to play, when they do show up on Sunday. So I think that will be a fascinating element that could potentially factor into the MVP conversation, depending on where some of these blue chippers line up.
Absolutely. And these running backs, they'll be lining up against some really talented linebackers in this camp as well. Tarvis Alford, recent Ohio State commit. I think everybody kind of thought that it was, leaning towards the Buckeyes here, although Miami was and is still in this race. Don't get it twisted. Miami's still in this race until the very end. The Vero Beach talent, but you have some sleepers out there that I think will make some noise. Hector Chavez is a local linebacker that I like, who's super athletic. He's not the tallest or biggest guy on the field, but maybe the one that makes the most plays. So look out for him. And Dylan Gill is obviously a guy who plays really well in coverage. So when it comes to linebacker, who do you think will stand out Sunday?
Yeah, another great position. We just confirmed Ezekiel Marcelin is going to show up there as well from Miami Central. You mentioned Alford. Man, this is as modern a linebacker recruit as there is in the country. He's tall, he's long, and he's already comfortable in space, which is really what you're looking for a modern linebacker, because typically you're looking for 3-down guys, right? What can you do on 3rd down? Can you rush the passer or can you cover? Alford can do both, but he's already shown that rare ability to cover. So I do think he's going to have some advantages going into Sunday with that length. Legitimate 6'2", already over 200 pounds as well. We talked about Marcelin, just as good a linebacker as you'll see on Friday nights. Another one who is very comfortable in space, but with a bit of a smaller stature than Tarvis Alford. So he might be an inside guy on Saturdays, but this Sunday he'll have an opportunity to contend one-on-one with some of these running back recruits. And again, we're getting a group coming down from the central and northern parts of the state that I think will mix it up nicely with these elite South Floridians that are expected to compete and compete well. I think of a guy like Tony Williams, who's a Jacksonville linebacker hybrid athlete who's 4 stars. Miami just offered last week. His tape is littered with great coverage. I think he had 2 pick sixes last year up in the Jacksonville area. How does he come down and contend with some of these South Florida running backs, some of these speedier guys that we've already talked about? So I think it's not only a great South Florida event, but I think this Rivals Camp is going to show that the entire state of Florida is not only, loaded everywhere, but, these competitors are willing to get in the car and drive several hours to not only maybe visit UM on Saturday, but certainly compete on Sunday. And we love to see that.
Awesome. Just curious, who is traveling the farthest for this Miami camp that you've seen?
Hey, there's like 3 Californians that are going to be here. They played for South Florida Express. There was a conflict with the LA Rivals Camp, which was the first one that went down a couple weeks ago. So we'll have some California love in the real Sunshine State down here this weekend. So love to see those guys mix it up. They're all modern day Bosco kids, highly coveted blue chip type recruits. So yeah, they could be the surprises and steal the show at some of these camps. There's really a little bit of everything going into it. And ironically, those guys are undeclared, but there are 2 USC commitments that are going to play, but they're both from Florida. So
right,
it's funky, and it's, I think, a microcosm of recruiting these days.
Yeah, USC, I think, like Miami, I think there's going to be such a resurgence with those 2 programs, historic programs, obviously, that haven't been living up to par, especially for their fan base's standards. I think with the changes in college football, the transfer portal, and their proximity to Sunshine, I guess you could say, it's really going to play a factor for those 2 programs down the line. So lastly, just wanted to talk to trenches a little bit. You mentioned offensive line, offensive lineman Zaire Addison, who I'm really, really excited to see out of Sumner. That program is like a program that's certainly on the rise out of the Tampa Bay area. And you also mentioned Floyd Boucard and Randy Arterica should be there as well. Just a bunch of guys in the trenches, a bunch of young guys too that will certainly, I think, will make noise in this camp and down the line. When you look at the trenches, just quickly, offensive, defensive line, which are some of the standouts that you expect to see Sunday?
Yeah, all eyes will be on Boucard, a guy who's a current 3-star for us. Certainly has looked better than that thus far this offseason. If he puts it together again, there's really going to be no denying that huge surge up the rankings. Really well put together, 6'3", 285 or so, and cat quick on the interior. You mentioned Randy Arterica, who's his teammate at Miami Central. Always good in these settings, a bigger, bit more powerful, classic maybe interior prospect. I think he's going to show out well. Ramondo Johnson's coming down from North Broward County. He'll be in the mix there. Of course, the St. Thomas and Chaminade contingents will all be strong. And then, again, as you mentioned, the younger group, how do they factor into things? We've got prospects that are coming down from IMG Academy, like an Elijah Golden, who just got Notre Dame on his scholarship offer list, kid out of Virginia originally, now at IMG, looking to contend with fellow Floridians now. How does he hold up? Does he work outside or inside? He's a bit of a tweener, which could be an advantage in this type of setting. So I think that's going to be a fascinating development on the defensive line. And then you've got other prospects who maybe aren't as heralded as you mentioned. Like a Samuel Mitchell is 6'6", 215 pounds. Plays receiver, but he's trying to transition into a defensive end and had double-digit sacks last year in Broward County doing so. How has he developed physically? Can he be that twitchy edge, off the corner that puts a lot of pressure on these offensive tackles trying to give ground. So I think D-line is a little bit more wide open beyond the obvious. If one of the interior guys dominates and it's so easy to see with that quick path to the quarterback, probably, MVP conversation right there. But if one of these edge guys can step up, and I think that's a wide open position in this 25 and 26 cycle in South Florida in particular, that could be head turning enough to steal the show. I mean, Javion Hilson, I think, would probably be the favorite if we're looking at the defensive end spot in particular. He's a guy who's already ranked in the top 50 nationally for us at Rivals, current Florida State commitment, but Miami, Alabama, many others trying to flip him from Cocoa High School. If there's a guy on maybe 5-star watch with a dominant performance, maybe Hilson is that guy. So really excited to see him at work. And we mentioned earlier, Jarquez Carter as well. I think he's another one, another 4-star who's on the rise, who has that opportunity to make the jump.
Hilson is a kid I like a lot. That's another player we expect to be at the University of Miami on Saturday, visiting the campus. So really excited to see him and all of these guys in the trenches. There's always great battles and one-on-ones there as well. And interested to see if Boucard, who highlights we are watching here, can have a repeat performance as we saw in the previous camp here in Miami. So everybody kind of wants to know who's next for Miami and its class. Right now they've got Elijah Melendez. You mentioned Wade and Charles, who's going to be at the Rivals camp, as well as Luke Nickel at quarterback and Lamar Williams at offensive line. So, and of course, we mentioned Gerard Pringle earlier, who's just added most recently to the class. Miami's in a good spot for a lot of players here. In particularly CJ Ewald, Byron Lewis, Randy Arderica. I think Miami's in excellent spots with those players. But as far as the next player to commit to Miami, or among those that I just mentioned, who do you think has probably the best chance to be added to Miami's 2024 class in the next upcoming months, which is going to be like a flurry of commitments coming up for you and I, John?
No doubt about it. A lot of the guys you mentioned, Marcus, are right on the cusp, right? It feels like they're just about ready to make that decision between Miami and maybe just one or two other schools, and I think that always provides an advantage for, the local team, which for most of the guys you mentioned is certainly the Hurricanes. So that'll be fascinating. I think Ewald is close. I think Byron Lewis is pretty close. Now, what gets interesting about this time of year in particular, we're in April, is that official visits start next month, in the month of May. But that's also the thick of spring football in the South of the United States, because that's where we play spring ball all the way until the end of May. So how the visit schedule sort of shakes out, I think, is going to impact a lot of these decisions, and that's why you see so many kids trying to take advantage right now in April with these unofficial visits to make these determinations. So Ewald, Lewis in particular, Kobe Howard is one to keep an eye on. He was going to commit publicly on Easter last weekend, but he held off from a public standpoint. We know Miami, FSU, Tennessee, among those in the mix for Kobe as well, and he'll be there on Sunday. Another one we probably should have mentioned from the receiver perspective. So, yeah, I don't know who's going to be next, but I think it will be one from this group. And then if there's a position to watch at Miami, I think it's wide receiver. You mentioned Wade and Charles, the sole commitment right now, but we think one of two things. One, it's going to be a bigger group to bring in for Miami, 3 or 4 guys. And we know the talent pool at wide receiver is just large, not only in South Florida, but throughout the state. And Miami is attacking it with very much a consistent approach. Kevin Beard's becoming a bit of a star on the recruiting trail. And I think this spring has only helped to reemphasize that, because, as you know, Marcus, kids are raving about his coaching style. So it's not just the relationship making that he's doing, but also the most important part is, hey, how are you going to coach me? How are you going to develop me if I pick your school? And now kids are coming to spring practice and seeing it firsthand with a very positive response. So if there's a position to feel very good about from the Miami perspective, I would go wide receiver, because it's going to be a big class, and Beard isn't the type to swing and miss on a lot of his priority guys. So couldn't tell you what the order is going to be, but if it's 3 or 4 guys, they're all going to be blue chip recruits, and they're all going to be pretty good at Miami, with the ability to make plays sooner rather than later, which is sort of what the program's been looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. A nice pool of guys that they are targeting, anywhere from Jamie French to Vernell Brown, like we mentioned, Nashawn Montgomery, Cortez Mills is another player that they like a lot, who's been to Miami's campus several times this year and in the past couple of months. So definitely at wide receiver, Miami has to feel really good about its chances. But lastly, man, before I let you go, just kind of want to talk about the current class. People kind of want to know what they have right now. I mentioned all of the guys already. You and I, we haven't talked on a podcast about Gerard Pringle, but we have obviously talked off camera about him. Which one of these guys do you think will make the biggest impact on the college level?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the low-hanging fruit would probably be Luke Nickel, because he's, built up to be, the future of the offense under Cristobal and Shannon Dawson. And what we saw in the last 12 months with him is that he fits. He fits that ability to push the football down the field. He's accurate, and he's athletic. He's sneaky athletic enough to be a truly modern passer. You need that. And it doesn't mean you're going to call running plays for the quarterback, but that mobility and comfort in the pocket and ability to operate beyond the pocket, I think is critical. And that's where we've seen Nickel really take a nice jump from his sophomore year into his junior year. And he's had a great offseason as well. Looking forward to seeing him at Rivals Atlanta here in a couple of weeks. But I think he's the low-hanging fruit to pick in terms of who will make the largest impact. But if I wanted an outside-the-box pick, give me Elijah Melendez. This is a big physical linebacker whose third down trait will be pass rushing. He's already 6'2", 6'3". He is rehabbing an injury, so we haven't seen him in action lately, which is unfortunate. But I actually checked in with him yesterday, and he's on track, to get back this offseason and be ready to go in time for his senior year in 2024. So I think he's one, if he develops that pass rushing trait on third down, who could become a bit of a reflection of what Miami wants to be. Downhill, big, strong, physical, and explosive, but also with some pass rushing upside to impact third down. So I think he could be maybe the sneaky long-term play on who might be the most impactful Hurricane commitment. But for now, give me the low-hanging fruit, and we're watching clips of him now of Luke Nickel, who's, again, really improved with his processing accuracy and ability to sling it to the third level, which is, if he was in the middle of nowhere, Iowa or Indiana doing this, it wouldn't be as big a deal. But this is state championship level in Georgia's highest classification. So it's not against, kids who aren't going to play beyond high school. These are a lot of Power 4 and FBS prospects littered on these defenses. And again, you see here the ability to navigate outside the pocket and deliver accurately on the run. Those elements are really where we saw a big uptick for Nickel at the next level. So I think he's got some special traits. He just bumped into the Rivals 250. And if he continues to show that improvement this offseason at Rivals Camp and Elite 11, all that stuff, he's only going to continue to ascend and look like a truly banner evaluation for Shannon Dawson, who at the time of taking Nickel's commitment, it wasn't, national news. It was very much regional and like, okay, let's find out more about the kid after the fact, which is usually not the case for elite quarterbacks, but he committed so early that he's been able to sort of develop as a Miami commitment. So it emphasizes the strength of that pledge and more importantly for Miami, the evaluation and ability to look ahead and project, which is obviously the foundation of any program.
Absolutely. I am really impressed with Luke Nickel, his poise in the pocket. And if you're watching these highlights here, you see that athleticism that you mentioned. which I think is a little understated, maybe undervalued from the national scene. But Miami certainly values his athleticism, his accuracy, his poise. Makes a lot of throws here off of his back foot that are still accurate. So you kind of see that he has a really high ceiling. Like he can be a lot better than what he is, which is already pretty good. Like you mentioned, breaking through to the Rivals 250. I like how you mentioned Elijah Melendez as well. This is a guy that Miami defensive coordinator Lance Guidry absolutely loves, calls him Little Ray Lewis. Just with
no big deal.
Yeah, with his just his power and his size, and and obviously that's high praise coming from the DC. So really excited for those two guys. John Garcia, ladies and gentlemen, national recruiting analyst for Rivals.com, kind enough to join me here on the Storm Tracker podcast. Thanks again for joining me, and we will see each other on Sunday, my guy.
Sounds good, brother. Get some rest. It's going to be a long one, but it should be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Once again, John Garcia from Rivals.com. I, of course, am the publisher for CanesCounty.com, part of the Rivals.com network. Make sure you subscribe to CanesCounty.com for free. Use the promo code Miami30. Also, subscribe to this podcast on all platforms, as well as subscribe to this YouTube channel live from Canes County. Until the next episode.